We all know before the 1990s, if you wanted to fly across the Atlantic, you needed 4 engines. That was just the rule. Regulators didn't trust twin-engine planes over the ocean. Like, if one engine quits, you needed backups, which made sense. And that's why the 747 became this icon. So in the 1980s, Airbus thinks the same and builds a new plane with 4 engines. And after spending $4 billion, they call it the A340. They thought they cracked the code because this plane was more modern than the 747 and also had long-range capabilities, which was perfect for transatlantic flights. But when they launched it, results weren't as expected because European airlines loved it, but US airlines bought 0. And ironically, the 4 engines, the whole reason the plane existed, became the exact reason American carriers said no. Here's the thing though, the A340 wasn't a bad plane. Like, it actually worked. Lufthansa bought them and operated 62 total across different variants. Air France grabbed around 30. Virgin Atlantic put them on their best routes. And Singapore Airlines even used the Dash 500 to fly non-stop from Singapore to Newark, nearly 18 hours straight, which was kind of insane at the time. So if it worked for all these carriers, what did American Airlines see that nobody else did? Why were Delta, United, American, the biggest carriers in the world, all passing on this plane? Turns out, the answer goes back to 1985, almost a decade before the A340 even flew. The FAA starts loosening these rules called ETOPS, Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards, which yeah, it's a mouthful. But basically, before this, if you wanted to cross an ocean with passengers, you needed 4 engines, and that was just how it worked. It was a safety thing, rooted in the fact that engines back in the 60s and 70s weren't super reliable, so if one failed over the Atlantic, you needed backups. But by the mid-80s, engines were getting way more reliable because jet engine technology had come a long way. So regulators started saying, okay, maybe twins can handle this. And by the early 90s, right when the A340 was launching, they were approving twin-engine jets for longer and longer ocean crossings, which meant the whole reason the A340 existed, that 4-engine safety cushion was disappearing while the plane was still being built. Airbus had already dropped $4 billion on this thing, so you can't just stop a program like that halfway through. But the ground was shifting under them, and there wasn't much they could do about it. And then there's this problem that nobody really wanted to admit at the time, because the early A340s, the Dash 200 and Dash 300 models used CFM56 engines. Now, these weren't bad engines since they powered tons of planes, including the A320 family, which became one of the most successful aircraft families ever. But here's the issue. Those engines were designed for a plane literally a third the size. So when you bolt CFM56 engines onto the A340, they're seriously underpowered, and pilots noticed it right away. Slow climb rates, especially in hot weather or at high altitude airports where the air is thinner and engines produce less thrust. One pilot basically said the climb rate was slow as fuck, which, you know, isn't great when you're trying to get a fully loaded jet off the ground in Phoenix in July, or at a mile-high airport like Denver. This wasn't a deal breaker for every airline, because if you're flying mostly from temperate sea-level airports like London, Paris, Frankfurt, it's manageable. But US carriers operate hubs in places like Denver, Phoenix, and Dallas with hot summers and high altitudes, so that underpowered climb performance became a real operational constraint. So you've got this plane with 4 engines that's supposed to be this safe, capable workhorse, but it climbs slower than it should, burns more fuel than a twin, and costs more to maintain. And meanwhile, twin engines are getting approved for the same routes the A340 was designed for. You can probably see where this is headed. And then Boeing launches the 777, and honestly, this plane changed everything. 777 was a twin engine, similar range to the A340, similar passenger capacity, but cheaper to operate. We're talking less fuel burn, less maintenance because there's half as many engines, simpler crew training, fewer spare parts to stock at every hub around the country, and it became iconic pretty fast. United was the launch customer, and they put it on flagship routes almost immediately. JFK to London, LAX to Tokyo. All the big moneymakers and other US carriers followed, and it just demolished the A340 in sales, like it wasn't even close. Because by the time both planes were in full production, the 777 was massively outselling the A340 across the board. Think about that for a second, because both planes could fly New York to London, LAX to Tokyo, Miami to Sao Paulo, any major long-haul route you can think of. Both could carry roughly the same number of people, around 300 passengers in typical configurations, but one costs significantly less to run every single day. If you're an airline trying to make money, which one are you buying? Because this is where it helps to understand how US carriers operate, because it's different from a lot of European and Asian airlines. American, Delta, and United. These airlines run massive hub-and-spoke networks, and they're operating thousands of flights every single day. American Airlines alone does something like 6,800 flights daily, which means that's a plane taking off every 13 seconds around the clock. When you're operating at that scale, efficiency isn't just important, it's everything, because every percentage point of fuel burn matters. Every hour of maintenance downtime costs you, and fleet complexity costs you. So put yourself in the room with a US airline fleet planner in 1993 or 1994, and you're looking at two options for your next long-haul aircraft order. The A340-600 has 4 engines, and that used to be a selling point, but now it's just extra cost. You're looking at 12% more fuel burn per seat compared to the 777, which isn't a small difference. Over the lifetime of a single aircraft, say 20 years, that's millions of dollars in extra fuel costs per plane. Then there's maintenance, because 4 engines means twice as many engine overhauls at several $1 million each, and each one takes the plane out of service for weeks. Crew training is more complex too, because pilots need separate type ratings, so you can't just move a pilot from a 767 to an A340 without significant retraining. The 777, on the other hand, was designed with commonality in mind. If you could fly a 767, transitioning to a 777 was relatively straightforward. The 777 has 2 engines, which means lower costs across the board, and your airline is running 6,000 plus flights a day, so you need planes that make money on every single trip. But there's one carrier that almost went a different direction, and that was Northwest Airlines. They were supposed to be different because in the late 80s, Northwest signed up as a launch customer for the A340 in North America. This was a big deal for Airbus. Finally, an American major committing to the plane. Northwest had crews lined up for training, simulators booked, route planning underway, and they were going to fly A340s across the Pacific, connecting their big hubs in Minneapolis and Detroit to Tokyo, Seoul, all across Asia. But in December 1992, Northwest cancels the entire order. The reasons given were engine issues, fuel cost concerns, changing network strategy. But really, it came down to the same calculation every other US carrier was making. The economics just didn't work anymore. Imagine being in that meeting room where you're a fleet manager or a route planner, and you've been building toward this for months, maybe years. Then someone runs the numbers again with updated fuel prices and the latest ETOPS approvals, and it becomes clear. This doesn't make sense anymore because the A340 is going to cost us more money per flight every single day for the next 20 years. And now you have to send out the memo for order cancellation. That's not a small decision because that's basically admitting the whole strategy was wrong from the start. And for Airbus, losing Northwest meant losing their foothold in the US market. So after that cancellation, no other major US carrier even seriously considered the A340. Airbus wasn't blind to these problems because they knew the early A340s were struggling, especially against the 777. So in the early 2000s, they rolled out new variants with bigger engines, stretched fuselage, and insane range. The Dash 500 could fly nearly 9,000 miles nonstop, Singapore to Newark, without breaking a sweat. But by then, fuel prices had spiked, and the 777 was already winning. When oil was cheap in the 90s, jet fuel was under $1 a gallon. That extra fuel burn was annoying, but manageable. When oil hit $100+ per barrel in the mid-2000s, and jet fuel hit $3 or even $4 a gallon, that difference became crushing. What A340 production ended in 2011, and by then, Airbus had only built 377 A340s total across all variants, which sounds like a lot until you compare it to the 777. Boeing has built over 1,700 of them, and they're still producing them today. As of 2024, there's fewer than 80 A340s still flying with major airlines, because most of them have been parked in desert boneyards or scrapped. For a plane that's only 30 years old, that's pretty brutal, since you still see 747s from the 1970s flying cargo routes, but the A340 is basically extinct. So here's why US airlines said no, and it's not some patriotic buy American thing, even though people sometimes assume that. It's just math. cold, hard economics. 4 engines cost more than 2, so when regulators started letting twins cross oceans safely, the A340's main advantage, that redundancy, that safety cushion, evaporated. And once that was gone, it was just a more expensive way to do the same job. US carriers operate these massive, high-frequency networks where margins are thin and efficiency is paramount, which means planes need to make money every day, every flight, every route, and the A340 couldn't deliver that. European and Asian airlines had different setups because they had fewer long-haul routes but higher value flights. Flag carriers like Lufthansa or Air France had different priorities like the prestige, passenger comfort, network reach, so they could absorb higher operating costs for a plane that fit their image and their specific route needs. Singapore Airlines wanted that ultra-long-haul capability for prestige routes, so the A340 made sense for them, at least for a while. But for US carriers, with their relentless focus on cost efficiency and high utilization rates, it never made sense. It's not like Airbus made a stupid decision, because in the 1980s, building a 4-engine long-haul jet made total sense. But the window of opportunity was narrower than anyone realized, so by the time the plane was ready, the world had moved on. It wasn't a disaster, you know? The A340 didn't crash or have major safety issues, and it flew safely for years. Even passengers liked it. It was quiet, comfortable, smooth. But commercially, it flopped, because in the airline business, the spreadsheets always win.